Welcome to the AI in Action podcast series, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Great to be with you again.
So, what scares you the most about AI?
Probably, being a kid who grew up watching the original Terminator movies, I have the same fear as everyone in my generation does, which is the machines, wiping out humanity, or enslaving humanity because they think of us like ants. But I think that that fear is anchored in something greater about AI, which is about how much control human beings are going to have. One question I always ask people back when I get asked about AI and intelligence, in intelligence we talk about key assumptions, a key assumptions check. So, I'll ask you, and there's no right or wrong answer, but what do you think the greatest assumption we're making about AI is?
That it's better than us, that it's smarter or will become smarter than us.
I think that's a great one. That goes to that same point about control, and mine is related to that. So my the key assumption that I think a lot of us are making, and I call it an AI paradox, is we're creating a technology that we want to cede more and more autonomy to, but we always want to have control over.
Mhm.
So it's a paradoxical balance because, we assume that we're going to be able to set limits essentially on AI when we keep giving it greater and greater freedom and get more and more responsibility over how it acts. And so, my elemental fear about AI is just how much control are humans actually going to have over it? And especially when we talk about things like, and this goes kind of to the Terminator piece, but control over weapon systems, control over key national critical infrastructure, things that really involve human lives.
Yeah, that's a great point. We can't give it all this autonomy and then expect to have complete control. I think describing that as an AI paradox is an excellent description.
And that goes to another further point on, when we talk about warfare and the role of AI in it, the the ethicists, say that 5 times fast, always talk about keeping humans in the loop. And this goes again back to that control thing. And from what I'm seeing and hearing, and watching interviews with people who are in AI and defense, is, and this goes to the targeting issue with intelligence. But what if AI is actually, what if the human in the loop is the thing that slows everything down? What if the human in the loop is the limiting factor? Not also just in terms of targeting, because we already know that having this AI architecture that helps with military targeting is speeding up the kill chain, the targeting process. But who's to say that humans actually always make the most ethical choices? And humans also make mistakes. Now, certainly AI can as well. But this is part of, again, the tipping point of AI is what happens when AI not only becomes more effective, but perhaps even more responsible than humans.
Mhm.
In other words, I was reading this article about Tesla and self-driving vehicles. And I had this conversation because I hopped in one of the Waymo self-driving vehicles in Austin, Texas a while ago. And we're scared. All of us, I think, are scared about ceding personal control to a computer. And, we think about, well, what if it's not programmed to do this, or what if it can't react the way a human can? But for any human who drives on the road today, how much do you trust the person next to you? A human being has like 180 degrees of vision with peripheral vision, not to mention all the distractions they have, cell phones, texting and driving, for instance. A self-driving vehicle has 360 degrees of sensors, and all that thing is doing is picking up information about the road around it and concentrating on all of those things at once in a way that, humans might still have more computing power. I mean, this is, a balancing
Mhm.
act. Do we? Hard to say. And we have human instincts, whatever that's good for. But we also have human frailties. Are we angry when we're driving? Are we sad when we're driving? Are we eating? Are we texting? So, I think about that and extrapolate it to war and national security. There's a lot of human limitations and vulnerabilities. And so, our, again, running assumption is that, yes, but it's better to have humans involved than not. Why? Well, like, why is that? Just because it makes us feel better? Because ethicists think that humans are capable of it and machines aren't? Again, I'm this is an area of uncertainty where I'm just not sure. I'm not convinced by all the arguments I'm hearing, and I think that I'll put a period or exclamation mark perhaps on this by saying one of the things that always surprises me is just how confident people are on both sides of the AI spectrum. You know, it's a tragedy or it's dangerous, it's this or it's going to be the greatest thing ever. I'm not that confident about any of this. You know, I just try and look at both sides and then ask questions that push people past their level of confidence.
Yeah, that's a lot to chew on. So, one thing that's amazed me when I've played around with AI is how much more rational it is than I am. Like
Hmm.
you're talking about all the emotions and that kind of come into the decision making of, humans. And one thing that's been interesting, it's kind of been more of a reflection than I expected on like a mirror back to me on kind of like, okay, well, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a responsible human?
Right.
And then what is really needed? Do we need just, complete logic running things, or what is that? The machine driven world versus the human, how we interact together, and kind of what that looks like for the future. It's brought up more questions about humanity than I expected coming from a new technology, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I think that's an excellent way to frame it, which is, you know, this concern or our focus on machines is actually making us reconsider what it means to be human, what it means to think and feel and act like a human. And, you know, it's causing, I think, a lot of discomfort, especially in the national security space, where, you know, we talk about decisions that involve life and death, and you know we feel better. But again, it's not just in national security. I mentioned self-driving vehicles. What
Mhm.
about hospitals and using AI for diagnosis? Because now you are entrusting diagnosis and diagnostic, I guess, intelligence or analytics, not just to human doctors anymore, but to machines.
So, what are you hopeful about with AI?
Well, yeah, it's a tough question to ask a guy who's a little has like Luddite sort of inclinations and is always just a little bit behind with like the cell phones or
Mhm.
computers or vehicles, you know, that I drive. I'm just always a little bit behind the times. But it's great though because when new technology comes out, I always get like one level below it, so I'm constantly amazed. So, you know, I don't need the latest and greatest because I'm dealing with something that's a couple years old. So when I get something slightly newer, I feel a lot better.
Mhm.
I think we're kind of already approaching what I'm hopeful about, which is things like health. You know,
Mhm.
can we have better diagnostic capabilities? You know, again, I sort of mentioned it with assumptions, competition with humans and human confidence, where now, you know, a human needs to even think through their own ideas and analysis, and you know, a machine that's doing that as well. Um, so this is where you know, when I listen to the AI optimists, let's call them, we have AI
Mhm.
pessimists and AI optimists. They are talking about a world of abundance, you know, a world that machines are going to be able to produce more. And the reason why you know, I said like I can see both sides of it because I just really
Mhm.
haven't completely made up my mind. And I think that level of uncertainty is something that we all should have when it comes to AI. But, you know, when you look at the arc of capitalism and technology and innovation, we've blown well past all the predictions about limits on human population and human and being able to feed enough people and what the world looks like.
Mhm.
And we've, you know, through capitalism and that rewards innovation and a political economy that has embraced it in the United States, you know, we've lifted more of the world out of poverty in the past 100 years than the past, well, any other point in human history. Why wouldn't AI, you know, why wouldn't AI be the next step in overcoming some human imposed limitations that we have? And so that does make me optimistic is, you know, again, better diagnostics, better driving vehicles, you know, that are aware if humans are paying less and less control at the wheel, maybe machines will pay more and pay
Yep.
their attention. You know, more maybe machines will have more control and pay more attention on the road. So yeah, again, you know, it's like everything else in life. You fix some things and break others. You solve some problems and create new ones.
That's just a great perspective. So, how is AI changing our society?
I'm not sure we're feeling the immediate effects of it yet. I think the
Uh,
change right now is more in perceptions and the uncertainty of those perceptions. I already mentioned uncertainty, and I think uncertainty is a healthy thing to have in intelligence and national security. I mean, you need to make decisions with a degree of self-assurance, especially if you're a policymaker. But you always should nurture a healthy degree of skepticism. And unfortunately, though, you have to be careful that you don't become so skeptical and so uncertain that you become paralytic. This is something that intelligence analysts and academics share in common because we can become that uncertain. We can always poke holes in arguments, and then it produces its own sort of uh, paralysis, in thinking or
mhm,
in doing. And so, I acknowledge all that, and that's why I am with a certain degree of healthy skepticism, I want to see us continue to innovate with AI. Just what that innovation's causing, though, and again, this is where I mentioned the absolute certainty that some people have that's going to be the greatest thing ever, and the absolute certainty that other people have that's going to be the worst thing ever, is producing a lot of confusion and concern in society. So when you look at polling, here's a great example. The United States has always been a technophilic country. We love
mhm,
technology. We've always been innovative and industrious people. It's embedded in our culture. And in fact, when you look at polling, Americans overwhelmingly are still optimistic about the role of technology in their lives, with one exception. When it comes to AI, Americans, again, by majority, are actually skeptical and even fearful of how artificial intelligence might affect their lives negatively. And so the biggest change that I see happening is students, for instance, are uncertain about what the future job market will be. We already are starting to see signals with software engineers that, everyone was being pushed into it. Students like go into software engineering, go into STEM fields.
mhm.
And now we're being told that some of the white collar jobs, not just in tech, but also law, for instance, perhaps diagnostically, like radiologists or, people who study epidemiologists, who study diseases, those jobs are jeopardized by AI. And so, the question is going to be how do we assimilate AI into different sectors of the economy? And then the broad issue there is how do we make sure that it doesn't cause so much unemployment systemically across our political economy that this causes a major rupture in how we do business. Is there going to be wealth? Do we need a living wage? These are the big questions, but we're not there yet. It's just perception right now and concern about it.
Yeah, it's felt very whiplashy, at least from kind of where I'm sitting on, just like you mentioned, go into STEM, study tech, all of this. I mean, 5 years ago, that was all I was hearing. And then now I'm looking around and many of my colleagues who are in tech are getting laid off. Or, they're not having the opportunities, this growth that was expected, which is weird because it's like a technological boom, but yet aspects of their skill sets are being automated. And it's just, it feels very whiplashy and very disruptive to the workforce.
Another paradox, if you will, which is, all the people in tech are sowing the seeds, perhaps,
Mhm.
of their own future,
Yeah.
unemployment by
Mhm.
working so hard on AI.
Yeah.
Um, no, it's a great point, and I think the whiplash metaphor is a good one because that's how it feels. I think to a lot of us is we don't quite know what to think, but you keep getting like pulled different ways in a way that becomes very frustrating. And alarming and confusing. And I
Yeah.
think that's where a lot of us are with AI.
Yeah, I heard it described the other day as that those in technology are becoming coffin builders. So they're literally building the technology that's going to replace them. And I was like, oh wow, that's that's a visual.
Right. Yeah. Um, no, I mean, I hope not. Or,
Right.
kind of as I sort of insinuated, at different points in human history, we've had to evolve
Mhm.
the roles of different jobs and different economic sectors in response to new technology and changes to the political economy. We're probably just going to have to do the same with AI, and it
Mhm.
might look radically different and this is coming from a historian. I don't like when things change radically, perhaps like a Burkean historian. But the thing is, um, okay, so then we have to change. Like,
Mhm.
radical changes happen in human history, and one thing that we do have going for us as humans is adaptability.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. So what do you think people misunderstand about AI?
this is where, uh, this is a limitation that I think a lot of us have
Mhm.
because it's kind of like a car mechanic. How much cars are m much more machine and computers today than they are just, the old what they used to be like tools
Yeah.
and assembled parts. But how much does the average person know about how a car actually works? How when you put it all together, and how many pieces of that car how much are instrumental or not? That's the thing I think with AI is it takes a certain level of subject matter expertise to be more attuned to the what's happening right now. Again, I wouldn't even listen to the people necessarily because we see a division between people working very steeped in AI about the optimists and pessimists. There's people whose jobs are AI. They either own the companies or they're engineers, and they're either overly alarmist or overly optimistic. So we can't get the long-term beat on them. But I think what we can do better is listen to what they're saying that AI is doing right now, immediately in the short term, what those limitations are, and what the opportunities and advantages are. So having a better appreciation for where we are on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to jumping to those future scenarios we were kind of talking about, is probably an area that we need greater public understanding. Like, where's the technology right now, and what is it affecting most immediately?
Yeah. So how do you think AI has the potential to impact democracy?
Radically, we kind of alluded to it with at least political economy.
Mhm.
What happens if AI causes mass unemployment across many, many different sectors of the economy? Not just white collar, but also blue collar.
Mhm.
Self-driving vehicles would
Mhm.
cause mass unemployment among truck drivers who are sort of the backbone of, how do you go to a grocery store and get your food? You know, and my concern there is mass unemployment, even though we're told, well, don't worry, there'll be abundance and a living wage. That's not really it. Humans need to be busy.
Mhm.
There's a reason why parents always tell their kids, an idle mind is the devil's playground. And, I think about it in terms of things like the Arab Spring. And this is just looking at this realistically and through numbers. The most dangerous population to be unemployed are 16 to 49-year-old males,
Yeah.
basically fighting age males. And yet, in some respects, again, looking at certain signals, um, AI could cause mass unemployment in a demographic that you don't want to not be busy. Not just because of poverty, again, if there's AI in abundance, but because you kind of need things to organize your life around. You need jobs, you need purpose. And if AI takes away jobs and purpose, I worry about how we're going to occupy ourselves as human beings. We're not, this is the utopian promise of some of the AI people. We're going to sit around eating grapes and, you know what I mean? It's like the modern lotus eaters, and we're not
Mhm.
going to strive for anything or want to organize around things. Organize around bad ideas.
Mhm.
Organize around good ideas. This is where the frailties of humans come into play. And for again a democracy like the United States, having mass unemployment can lead to mass disenfranchisement. What if AI does create too many have-nots and too few haves, or people who are able, and I don't mean that economically or in terms of what they have, but too many people are not able to like live their life with purpose and with a
Mhm.
job that makes them feel proud every day and feel accomplished. And then too few people still have these jobs, whatever they are. So that's just, this is more of an economic and political economy argument. When you look at, however, national security, for instance, in AI, look, looking at social media today, AI produced videos like, the Iranians or who knows, the Chinese, the Russians. AI replicated bad ideas and
Mhm.
disinformation, AI propaganda, AI generated images. these are more immediate concerns because they're contributing already to this just absolutely insane and in many ways toxic information environment that are propagating a lot of bad ideas. And so I have a more immediate concern there about what the role of AI in disinformation propaganda.
Mhm.
And I guess, for the military people listening, the new term of art that they love so much, cognitive warfare. Not everyone
Yeah.
loves it. That I think is a more immediate impact to democracy is how AI is further polarizing our society by being manipulative of the information environment.
Yeah, that's such a great description, Jeffrey. I think um, it really resonated with me, kind of how you're talking about how, the effects of mass unemployment and then kind of the state that it puts, our population in. And then that's kind of fertile ground. It's its vulnerabilities for then AI stepping in again and being used to scale, this manipulated information that, basically attacks, cognitive warfare attacks on our people regarding what to trust, what's worth it, what they should spend their time on, what it means to be an American, what values they should have. And it's something that um where I live is very rural. And I feel like so much of the discussion around AI is like Silicon Valley, DC, Silicon Valley, DC.
Right.
And I was at a community event the other night, and people who work blue collar jobs are losing their jobs currently where I live due
Mhm.
to impacts of AI. And it is what you're describing of, what is their purpose? They didn't see this coming. What are they supposed to do? There's not a lot of options where we live.
Yeah.
And it is causing this very rapid, unanticipated, like second, third order effects in a way that I feel like it's not being discussed, but will definitely show up on election day. I mean, I think, and broader than that.
And I think we're seeing it with now the idea of data centers and
Yeah.
power hubs that support AI. That's now a campaign point is
Mhm.
let's not, let's not transfer all our electricity to support AI. Basically, it's a scarce resource. Just ask the Europeans in a lot of ways about
Mhm.
electricity. It's still what keeps you warm at night. It's what keeps your fridge running. How much of it do you want to go to power things that aren't, just used for basic day-to-day living. So we're kind of seeing it on the campaign trail. You know, again, the problem is that ignores a broader national security competition and dynamic, which is, and one of the tactics, and this is where I'm uncertain, but one of the tactics that some use, which is we need to work on AI because we're in a dynamic competition, and this isn't just American public sector, it's also private sector with bad actors and with adversaries, strategic state level adversaries, perhaps proxies and surrogates of theirs who are also private companies, public private companies overseas. Meaning, if we put too many guardrails up on our own
Mhm.
AI innovation, what happens when an adversary gets something that turns out to be a serious strategic advantage? And I am sympathetic to that argument because as a historian, I look at the evolution of military technology and know that we're better off with some of those, major breakthroughs in military technology. It's good we got them first or evolved them better. And that's the key too, is, it's not just the technology, it's how you implement it and use it. And certainly I think we're still fortunately ahead in terms of global innovation.
Yeah.
But if we start, letting too many Luddites like myself put up guardrails on AI that actually stifle that innovation, who's going to innovate and how dangerous is that innovation going to be already to American democracy, except the threat isn't at home, it's coming from overseas.
Yeah. Yeah, we're definitely in an arms race that's a little different than what it's not just stockpiling, guns. Yeah. So, what safeguards do you think should be in place regarding AI, given that we don't want to just hit pause on innovation for all the points that you raised? What should we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. We sort of saw some of the entry points of this debate with the Anthropic DOW Department of War dispute over the uses of what they're contributing to the greater package of Palantir um, in terms of autonomous weapons and domestic surveillance tools. Again, that's just a starting point, but it seems like you can see that among some of the innovators who look at how their technology could be used, they have concerns about how governments might use it. And I think that is also the cause for concern when I mentioned that poll earlier about the majority of Americans being suspicious of AI. One of the reasons why is how it's going to be used against them. For instance, for information collection. So that's an intelligence tool there. Will AI be turned against the American people for purposes of mass surveillance? We have in existence, we've had over the years different types of statutory protections against domestic surveillance. Again, I'm thinking about this in my intelligence historian world. So, are we looking at extending those types of protections to artificial intelligence? How do we ensure that it's not used for mass domestic surveillance that then is acted upon? One of the issues that you have today, and I heard about this, I think it was just 2 or 3 days ago when Austin, Texas had this mass shelter in place text sent out because of some young people who grabbed guns and started going all over. Well, there's a couple things there. One, a mass text being sent out. Imagine if AI is, linked to everyone, has the ability to send out messages that could produce public panic or also produce public order. And then the other thing is do we want cameras all over the place so if something like that does happen, police can respond faster and get, something like that under control faster? These are trade-offs between liberty and security. AI enters this argument that is an old one. It's an old debate we've always had about the balancing act between liberty and security. And I guess where I fall on it is, I want to see traditional constitutional protections that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights extended to this technology. But, the national security, that's kind of the constitutionalist, the American citizen in me. The national security person in me also thinks now we have tools that can protect us better if used properly, but it might require hopefully not breaking, but being more pliable with how we interpret constitutional protections. This is something that Americans today, I think, are confronting again, that balance between liberty and security, where they're seeing how just technology is overwhelming their lives, how their information is being collected in mass by both governments and private companies. AI is the tool that everyone's talking about that is going to vacuum up all that information and then analyze it and then apply it in different areas. So again, not just national security, but to the economy, to your health, to making cities function more efficiently with streetlights. Safeguards are the way that we think about it in terms of protecting our constitutional rights, but what if they're also no longer as efficient? What if they actually jeopardize our security in order to like protect rights that are probably under great strain anyways due to this technology? So, I'd like to see the ones about like mass surveillance, for instance, having legislation that prohibits the government from using AI for like mass surveillance that then it can act upon. But are we already past that in terms of the amount of data that is just being passively collected on us by private companies that then goes to the public? And the last point on that, which I alluded to already, is we need to be careful. It's okay as a democracy to, you want to be more restrained than, say, like a totalitarian state or something. But you can't be so restrained that you become helpless, that you can't defend your people. And so, again, this is precarious because this is where that whole big debate between the AI optimists and AI pessimists comes in. But one thing that I can say using my law degree is we're probably going to see a whole lot more cases in courts involving the use of AI, as AI affects more and more of our economy, both civil cases and criminal cases and constitutional law cases.
Yeah, that's an excellent kind of overview. I appreciate your emphasis on, you can't try to strike this balance, but you've got these trade-offs, and it's really not it's not just a quick and easy answer. And anyone proposing a quick and easy answer to this is probably way off base. So,
Agreed. Yeah, that's the thing is there definitely aren't going to be quick and easy answers here, and that's why I said, we have to approach both um the Chicken Littles that are saying this is the end
yeah.
of humanity, but also the utopians who are saying, this is going to be the greatest thing ever with a degree of skepticism, and ask a lot of really tough questions of them to see, where their uncertainties and assumptions are.
So, what do you think an AI empowered future is going to look like for Americans?
We spent most of the conversation saying it's hard to predict the future here, and then here comes this let's predict the future
Mhm.
question. This goes back to the first two questions on what scares me most and what I'm most hopeful for. Um, Looking at the future, you don't want it to be a dystopian AI Terminator type future. You want it to be the more, it makes life better. People are healthier because you have AI looking through your medical information faster, doing early diagnosis or
Mhm.
preventative care better because we're able to do mass preventative care for individuals tailored to their specific morbidities or their specific vulnerabilities. Is AI again? Because it's so weird for me to say this, but when I talk about distracted driving with humans versus a machine that only has one job, which is just to get the human from point A to point Z as safely as possible. And there is a liability point in there, which is the people producing these self-driving vehicles don't want to be liable, so they have a fiduciary and a legal obligation to produce a very safe mode of transportation. So is AI going to make, for instance, driving around among cities safer? None of us like it. Like we don't like the red light cameras.
Yeah.
But if more people get tickets for running red lights because you have AI hooked up and seeing it and it just sends that ticket right to your door, um, will we be safer drivers? Will we be more alert, or will we not be driving and vehicles will take over? In major urban areas, probably more so than rural areas. That these are the hopeful things about what an AI future looks like is take where we are today and make everything just a little bit better. A little bit more selection in your grocery stores, a little bit safer driving on the streets, a little bit safer cities. That would be, to me, good enough. In other words, we don't need to have this perfect future of AI, but if we can use it across different sectors, and this includes intelligence and national security, which is the area you and I, are most invested in, and just make things a little bit better first. Instead of trying to drastically overshoot the problems of human history and human frailties and vulnerabilities and human nature, let's just try and augment in specific areas where we think AI can be most useful and helpful. And I think in terms of intelligence and national security, we're seeing what AI allows us to do in a military campaign. We haven't really talked about the intelligence and national security overseas angle because we are seeing evidence of that. And it looks like we can identify targets faster with more precision. Although it sounds like it's unclear. I heard a rumor that the girls' school that was struck, that people were saying in Iran, that people were originally saying was an AI target and it was a bad target, actually was like an active site now on an active IRGC base. In which case, it's like, well, was the AI really that wrong? How much of the human do you want in the loop or not? So, this goes back to like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. That, I always want to end on like the intelligence and national security piece because it's where we are. But, are we going to be more tempted to be to are we going to be more trigger happy because we think that we can attack more targets more accurately, more quickly with this AI technology? Um, this is where I go back to saying let's think about incremental changes and really rely on the people who are subject matter experts who are telling you like I can do this right now. I can't do this other thing that you think. And no, we're not at this drastically changed future yet. And try and make those like micro adjustments and improvements. But one more thing, humans don't really work that way. And in a way, are we better off? Because, if humans don't think in great world-changing terms, you're not going to invent wheels and you're not going to invent, you're not going to dare to do human flight. You're not going to create electricity. So I just want to be careful about stifling human ingenuity and creativity too much. And the ironic thing about AI is, well, it might even overtake human ingenuity and innovation, and that's the future that your guess is as good as mine as anyone watching this.
Oh, and what does that leave us with?
Right. And what kind of future does that leave us with? One more point that I think we should just end on is there's different things. This is kind of like a personal but interesting story. A doctor who had saved my dad's life many, many, many years ago, epidemiologist. And I reconnected with him recently when I spoke at a local event, and he's a member of this society. He and I reconnected, and brilliant, brilliant guy, and he wrote an article and on medicine and AI, and he mentioned something called a cognitive horizon. The cognitive horizon is basically the limits of human cognition. We still have cognitive horizons, and humans have always had it. We have religion, which is to help us cope with cognitive horizons, limits to what we have. And in earlier generations and earlier periods of human history, there were limits to what humans understood about the world around them, understood about space. What he warns about with AI is a cognitive horizon where we just cannot be 100% sure that we know what the limits of this technology are going to be. And so I think that's the most humbling thing I always remember about AI is are we humans, is there a cognitive horizon here where we just all need to be a little bit more again, humble about our predictions about the future. So I hope that I was somewhat measured in my own with you today.
You were. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights on AI in action. I think you gave folks lots to think about. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Hannah.